Hello, welcome to our webinar today. Sorry for a short delay because of some technical problem. I'm Anna Choi and I'm leading a communication team at Yeosijae. We are delighted to have you join our webinar today. And this is the first in our series of Global Future Dialogue. And today we will discuss the sustainability in the pandemic era. Given that COVID-19 outbreak has brought broad and profound changes across the world, we have conducted several research projects examining the challenges we are facing and seeking for solutions for a better future. Especially this webinar is planned to put together invaluable insights from experts around the world. And today we'll start the session with UN Sustainable Development Solutions Networks. And today, the question on the crisis of sustainability and the issue of global governance will be explored. And this is my great honor to introduce our panelists today. First, Ambassador Won-soo Kim, our chairman of International Advisory Board at Yeosijae. He served as a Korean diplomat and former UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. He also served as Assistant Secretary General and Special Advisor to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And now he's currently an eminent person for CTBTO and a board member for the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizenship. And Jeffrey Sachs is a world-known professor of economics, leader in sustainable development, and senior UN advisor. He currently serves as the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University and is a special advisor to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the Sustainable Development Goals. And during the webinar, please feel free to leave your comments and questions in the bottom of the chat box. Your opinion will be a great asset for us to plan a future webinar at Yeosijae. And now we're about to start, and I will pass the virtual podium over to Ambassador Won-soo Kim.
Dr. Anna Choi, for your very almost flattering introduction, and welcome everybody to the Global Future Dialogue. We planned this dialogue to prepare for the day after COVID-19. I'm very happy to launch this dialogue with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, my longtime friend, and also a long-time special advisor to the United Nations Secretary General for Sustainable Development. As Anna said, he doesn't need any introduction because he's so well known and widely respected around the globe for his tireless work to make a world better for all. But I just want to add one personal observation about him, because I have a chance to observe his work around the globe personally, and he is a really respected scholar committed to sustainable development and equitable development for everybody. But I also believe he's the scholar in action. He always put his best effort to translate his thinking into real work and action. So I'm very happy to launch this dialogue with him today. COVID-19 presents the world with unprecedented crisis, dual crisis, economic and health. And still, there are many unknowns about this virus. So it is a very difficult battle. We have to fight this COVID-19 virus while we are learning about it. And uncertainty always breeds fear, and fear always intoxicates our economy and also disrupts social life. Despite many unknowns, I think two things become very clear. The first thing is that until everybody or every country is out of this virus, nobody and no country can claim it's out of the woods. So the whole international community and whole humanity is in this fight together. And secondly, new normal in the day after COVID-19 is gotten over with. New normal will be very different from the status quo ante. So although we may get back to our life, but maybe some sort of social distancing and other safety measures may have to be maintained for quite a long time to come. And this will make our life, even in the day after COVID-19, will be markedly different from before. And also we have to take this virus not as a one-off event, because we have to take this virus very seriously as the warning the nature has sent to the whole humanity against our unsustainable lifestyles. Virus may have been forced to migrate from their previous host, because humanity's settlements, habitat of wild animals who served as the host to this virus, they lose their habitat, and as their host lose their habitat, maybe the virus also may be forced to migrate from animals to animals, now eventually to humans. And also because of the global warming we created since the Industrial Revolution began over 200 years ago, global warming has many side effects, and one of which includes the melting of glacier. So many viruses which were entrapped in the glacier now may begin to be released to affect humans. So we have to take this as a warning shot that nature has sent to us, and therefore we have to take this as a wake-up call for the whole humanity to change our unsustainable lifestyles. So I'd like to ask Jeff to give his insights on this crucial aspect. What messages we have to get through this virus or against our unsustainable lifestyles. Jeff, the floor is yours now.
What a wonderful honor it is to be with you, Won-soo, and to all of the people joining, and thanks to the Future Consensus Institute for holding this wonderful seminar. The world is challenged today, as you said very eloquently, with the biggest disruption in lives since the Second World War, if you look at the global scale. So it's been at least 75 years since we've had a disruption so large. And the economic disruption really will compare with the Great Depression, most likely, which was in the 1930s. Why is this? Well, of course, the virus itself is a terrible shock. This is a new virus that human beings have not experienced before, at least in modern history, and so we don't have immunity. Virtually the entire world population is vulnerable to this virus. It happens to spread very easily and very quickly, and that means that when it is not controlled, the time for doubling of the number of infected people is just a few days, maybe 3 to 4 days, you get a doubling of the number of active infected people. It also is a very insidious virus because even when people don't have symptoms, because they haven't developed the symptoms yet, or maybe they never will have symptoms, they are still infectious to other people. And so it's possible to have outbreaks when people are transmitting the disease, even though they don't even realize themselves they are infected. This is unlike SARS, where people were very sick first for many, many days before they became infectious to other people. And the fourth attribute of this virus is that it kills in large rates. It's estimated, and it depends on the circumstances, that roughly 1% of the people who contract the virus die from it. Of course, this depends on age and the individual health. It even seems to depend on whether there's a lot of air pollution, which makes the death rate even higher. And it certainly depends on the health system as well, because if the hospitals can't cope, then the death rate can rise well above 1%. So when you add all of these factors together, this is a real shock to the world, because it is spreading everywhere and it is killing a lot of people. But having said that, it's also very clear, strikingly clear, that different parts of the world are experiencing this epidemic in very different ways. And I'm so happy for Korea that through very diligent work of the public health system, the Korea Centers for Disease Control, the companies that developed testing kits very fast, the diligence of the government, and the good behavior of the population. Aside from the one big outbreak that took place in the Daegu church community, Korea has made great control of this epidemic. And overall, the reported number of deaths in Korea come to around 267 when I last looked. That is about 5 deaths per million population. Now, if I compare that with my country, the United States, we have 100,000 deaths now, if you can imagine that. We have 330 deaths per million population. And the infection rate continues to rise and the deaths continue to rise. So it's almost a different world what Korea has achieved in controlling the epidemic and the failure of control in the United States. And if you look a little bit more broadly, it's not only Korea in the Asia-Pacific region that has done very well. China, which was the source of the epidemic to begin with, got it under control through drastic actions from January 23rd until basically mid-March, and brought the epidemic under control. So China has had about 3,000 deaths reported, or about 3 per million population. Taiwan has done an extremely good job of containing the epidemic. Hong Kong has done an extremely good job of containing the epidemic. Australia and New Zealand have done very good work in containing the epidemic. So East Asia in general, on the whole, has had much, much greater success than actually Western Europe, where in Italy, France, Spain, the United Kingdom, and even in Germany, things really have created hundreds of deaths per million population, many times the death rates in the Asia Pacific and in the United States. And now, Won-soo, as you know, the epidemic has spread in a terrible way through South America. It's in an explosive condition in Brazil and in Mexico and in the Andean countries, Ecuador and Peru. And there are major pockets of outbreak in other places, in Russia, most likely, in Iran, in Pakistan, possibly in Indonesia, and the fate of Africa and India, two huge and still quite poor places, hangs in the balance. So the first thing that I would emphasize, Won-soo, is that while this is the result of many factors like the ones you mentioned, pushing into unknown habitat, the dangers of coming into contact with new infectious diseases like happened with SARS, like happened with the Middle East respiratory syndrome MERS, like the recombinant influenzas like H1N1, like the Nipah virus in 2014, 2015. This pandemic is the latest shock. There will be more, but it's being handled in such a different way in different regions. The Asia Pacific, it's both the governments and the population doing an excellent job. In my country, the government has completely failed. You can't even imagine how incompetent the Trump administration is, starting with the president himself, who, as you know, I regard as the worst president in American history. But he has led an administration that's disastrous. And the American people are not very well understanding or behaved in this epidemic. They just want to go out. They don't want to obey any rules. Many people don't want to wear face masks. They don't exercise proper physical distancing. And so this is why the epidemic runs out of control. So this is a challenge of governance, and it's a challenge of politics. And unfortunately, right now, the United States is failing that test. Many countries in Europe are failing. Brazil is failing. Mexico is failing. It is, I could say, the failure of populism that we have, whether it's Trump or Bolsonaro in Brazil or Lopez Obrador in Mexico, or other populists that don't have the discipline to follow good practice, and where the populations are stirred up to unrest, actually, like they are in the United States, not to obey proper etiquette, proper manners, and proper hygienic behavior. And so this is why a controllable crisis is not in control. And I'll just make one final point. This epidemic could be contained in a relatively short period of time, because what Korea has accomplished, in principle, could be accomplished in the United States or Brazil or Mexico or India or Africa. Of course, Korea knows better how to do many things, but the same best practices could be applied if we were systematic with strong, respectful, honest government. Then we would control this epidemic within a few weeks. But because we have so many bad governments, like my own in the United States, we're going to be punished for years. It's not going to go away as it could, and the economic effects are going to be huge, because the United States will have a Great Depression as a result of the mismanagement of the epidemic. We will have 20% unemployment rates, I think, throughout the rest of this year, because there will be no fast recovery, because there will be no containment properly of the epidemic, because that requires discipline of the people and of the government. So let me start with those very unhappy observations. But the happy observation is that at least the Asia-Pacific region has done much better, and that's a real opportunity for Asia.
Thank you, Jeff, for your insightful comments on a number of factors. And I like to maybe highlight some of the points you made. And I think, in general, what countries in East Asia are doing, I think, also provide at least some silver lining to this crisis, so that best practices and lessons learned can be emulated for the rest of the world. Of course, that requires global leadership. And as you eloquently pointed out, Jeff, we are suffering from governance failure, not only domestically, but also internationally. And one thing East Asian countries in general are doing better this time, also thanks to lessons learned from the earlier outbreaks of SARS in 2003 and MERS in 2012 and 15. So countries in East Asia learned very difficult but painful lessons, but through that lessons learned and post-mortem exercise, we came up with better preparedness. So enhancing preparedness when we cope with any type of crisis, including health, is the most effective way. So I think we need global governance, which will strengthen the international capacity to enhance preparedness for the whole world. So that's the first point I want to emphasize. And second point, also I agree with you, Jeff, is the patterns of this virus is migrating the whole world. As the Southern Hemisphere, in political terms, we call Global South, is now entering the winter season. And Global South, in general, is not well prepared as well as the Global North. And even countries in the Global North are now suffering a lot. And still, countries in the Global North are not out of the woods. But now, we have seen maybe third wave now in Latin America spiking up. And I remain extremely concerned than what had happened to Africa, because we have witnessed Ebola affecting several West African countries on a scale maybe much less than we are seeing on COVID-19 on a global scale, but they suffered a lot because they lacked the coping capacity, and they need international assistance. So the question now, I think, we have to think ahead is what international community will have to do in such a tragic scenario coming through for the countries in the Global South. And if we don't help them cope with the problem, and it will come back, swing back to the countries in the Global North for the next winter season. So we have enlightened self-interest to help those countries in the Global North cope with this problem. But the then question is, who, which country or which organization should take the lead for this exercise? And it used to be countries, as you said, in the West to provide resources and help Global South needs. But as countries in the Global North, in the West in particular, are so preoccupied with coping with their own problems, and I'm worried that if it hits Africa after Latin America, and then it will be a tragedy for everybody, not only for Africa, but also for the whole world. Because I'm worried that maybe second wave for the countries in the global north this coming winter may be more severe if we don't help countries in the global north, south cope with the problems they will eventually have. And third point is then what should be the solutions? Solutions are very clear. I believe that solutions we design should be embedded in a sustainability and equality closely in our mind, because this COVID-19 exposes the dark sides of every society, because it hits the more vulnerable group, poor, and also with less healthy conditions living with, and also it exposes neglects and excesses each society has, because it hits, for example, migrant workers and also minority group. It hits people of color in the United States, maybe at least 3 to 5 times more than the majority group. And also in Korea, as you said, it hits a church and also those who work in a not very affordable working conditions in a closed and crowded spaces. So the crisis highlights the need for us to design solutions in a more equitable and more sustainable, more friendly with the ecosystems, more friendly with the nature. So that requires a lot of efforts. And in this respect, I welcome the recent decision taken by the Korean government to design some sort of a new deal to cope with dual crisis COVID-19 has caused, economic, health and economic, in a fundamentally different way, because we need a paradigm shift, as you eloquently emphasized, Jeff. And Korean government emphasizes 2 aspects. I mean, digital New Deal, because now a lot of changes have been enabled by the smart use of new technology, including ICT and even artificial intelligence technology. And also, digital New Deal should be supported by Green New Deal. And I think unless we design solutions in a greener way, as you have emphasized throughout your last 20 years of work for zero carbon economy. So without those 2 things, smart use of technology and greener, more sustainable way of business are embedded in our solutions, maybe we'll be hit again by maybe different virus or different disaster, including disastrous climate events. So I hope these 2 solutions, digital and Green New Deal, can be adopted by as many governments as possible. But I'd like to hear your suggestions on what elements should be included when each government tries to design new solutions against COVID-19, but also against maybe future epidemic and also future climate-related disasters. Thank you, Jeff. Floor is yours.
much. Thanks for all of that wisdom. I'm going to talk about the geopolitics for a moment, because this crisis is coming at a very, very difficult and complicated moment of geopolitics, which is, of course, your domain and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's domain. The fact is, we are the 75th year of the United Nations, but the multilateral system is not well either. It's not healthy. In large part, I blame the United States for this. The United States always has had two different visions. One, a multilateral system, because the U.S. helped to invent it and create it. The United Nations itself was a work of great imagination and leadership of Franklin Roosevelt, our greatest president. Yet the other view of the United States has been dominance, or sometimes called primacy, that the U.S. Insists it must be the most powerful country, and it must fight against any other country that becomes technologically and economically powerful. And so what's happening right now, which is very difficult, is that as this epidemic is going on, the United States was already engaged in what I believe to be a very dangerous set of actions against China. And the United States has propounded the view that China is a new enemy, that it must be fought, it must be resisted, and we must disengage with China. And because of this, the United States does not talk about cooperation. It actually aims for creating an alliance bloc that fights against many other countries, China and countries that are friendly with China. And so the United States fights with Iran, the United States fights with Venezuela, the United States fights with China, and many other countries as well. And therefore, the Trump government and Trump himself as president are against the international institutions right now, because he says they're too friendly to China. And of course, it's become famous that the United States cut off the funding for the World Health Organization just in the middle of this pandemic emergency. Well, I can only tell you I regard this policy by the United States as extremely dangerous and extremely wrong thinking, because by calling China an enemy repeatedly and taking action, for example, to stop the sale of semiconductors, maybe from Samsung or from others to China, this will create an enemy and create great instability and create the conditions for prolonged economic depression, in fact. Because if we're fighting, we will not control the epidemic. If we do not control the epidemic, we will not have a recovery globally. As I said, and I don't mean to make it so political, but it's a factual statement, not a partisan statement. It's not because of my political party or anything like that. I regard Donald Trump as the most dangerous and incompetent person ever to be president. And I don't say it lightly. I say it out of great concern, because when he is president, we cannot solve the global problems. You know, not only did he cut the funding for WHO, not only did he prevent a rational response to the epidemic so that we have 100,000 deaths, he also withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement. So he is the first enemy of the fight against global warming. So this is a terrible problem that the United States, which was until recently seen as the world leader, and until recently as Korea's protector and ally, has become a very unstable country, and I am sorry to say a very dangerous country, actually. It's my own country, so I don't say it happily or lightly. And I don't know, even if Trump is defeated by former Vice President Biden, who's, of course, a very normal and decent man, and would not have these unstable and dangerous ideas of Trump. I don't know whether the United States will be governable very easily for many years to come, because Trump is both a cause of our instability, but he's also a symptom of our very deep social and political divisions in the United States. We don't agree with each other. We can't even agree to fight an epidemic that's killing Americans. Everybody is arguing with each other. Everybody is saying so many outrageous things. So we don't even take care to save our own selves in this shouting match. So this comes back to the question about what to do. And, you know, I have a somewhat idealistic idea, but it's, I hope, in some way practical, but it is an issue for Korea, which is, you know, always in a very challenging security situation because of North Korea, of course, and because of the position in East Asia. But I so much hope that as the United States has ended its global leadership, that the countries of the Asia-Pacific would increase their cooperation, because they can't depend on the U.S. for security. So the security is going to have to come, I believe, from within the East Asia region, not something that is brought by the United States, which is more unstable than stable, something that is achieved within the Asia-Pacific. I very much like the regional comprehensive economic partnership, which is the 10 ASEAN countries, plus Japan, Korea, and China, plus Australia and New Zealand, 15 countries in total. Unfortunately, India did not join. But those 15 countries, out of them, 14 of the 15 have the epidemic under control. Probably the only one in the whole group that doesn't have it under control right now is Indonesia. But probably all the rest of ASEAN has it relatively under control. Australia, New Zealand, China, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Laos, at least. Maybe Indonesia, Philippines, Myanmar, we don't know for sure. But most of the 2 billion people in the RCEP region are living in countries where the virus is under control. Now, I would like, and I admit it's idealistic, I would like these countries to cooperate closely to restore trade with each other, safe travel with each other, agreed protocols to keep the virus completely suppressed, and cooperation to help the rest of the world. Starting, by the way, with Indonesia, so that Indonesia does not get out of control and destabilize East Asia. I would also try to help India, because India has not lost the battle, but it has not won the battle yet. But all of this requires a different point of view, because the United States is saying, don't cooperate. China's an enemy. Don't sell semiconductors. Kill Huawei. Stop Chinese recovery. But if you follow the U.S. approach, we will not have cooperation. We will not have recovery. And unfortunately, we will have the kind of world that Mr. Trump has created inside the United States, a world of deep divisions, even hatred, a world where the epidemic is raging, and a Great Depression, because we are in a depression in the United States, not just a recession, but a depression. So my hope, admittedly idealistic, is that China, Korea, Japan, ASEAN, Australia, and New Zealand could have a summit meeting to make sure that in the Asia Pacific, this epidemic is ended, to set agreements on reestablishing travel, tourism, and trade among the countries, to have transparency in relations with each other. And because it's a big group that has lots of different kinds of interests, no one country, not China or anyone else, would be dominant. And then the Asia Pacific could do so much to help Africa and to help Asia so that this doesn't get out of control. I'm afraid that it may be too hard for the Americas, because what's happening in North America is not in Asia's control at all. That's only our own struggle. And what's happening in South America is going to be deeply affected by Brazil, where the government is terrible and where the president is irrational like Trump. So these are big geopolitical challenges, but if the Asia Pacific could end the epidemic, as it's very close to doing, if it could cooperate peacefully, it could help so much a large part of the world. And finally, let me just say, the idea of a Green Deal is a fantastic idea. One of the reasons that Korea had so much success in stopping the epidemic was all the online applications that Korea developed quickly. So you had so much information coming on the phones, coming in online applications, so many smart devices, because Korea is in the lead on using ICTs, deeply embedded in education, now in health, because telemedicine was allowed during this period, and I hope Korea continues that because it's a smart method, in e-governance, in applications for public health. And this is very useful, very important. Also, as you said, clean energy now, because Korea could be a great producer of the technologies of clean energy and smart grids. And if East Asia, in fact, the Asia Pacific goes in this way, I would like to see an ASEAN Green Deal. I would like to see, of course, Australia, which is too dependent on coal, face up to reality now and move to all the solar energy that it has. I would like to see China understand now that the air pollution is so dangerous that it has to leave coal behind. And then partner with Europe, which has agreed to make the European Green Deal the basis of its recovery. Because I've always believed that Eurasia, meaning the combination of Europe and Asia, which has about 3/4 of the whole world's population in Eurasia, could cooperate together on the Green Deal. So now that Korea is going this way, I think that there's a chance for a Green Deal in China, in Japan, in ASEAN, in Australia, New Zealand, and Europe already is going to do that. They're about to adopt a $500 billion program of recovery, and this could be combined with the Asian Green Deal for a Eurasia-wide global success story. This would be a way to help most of the world economy. I think finally Americans would come to understand we're way behind in good governance, we're way behind in competitiveness, we're way behind in green energy. We would start to try to emulate and catch up with Asia, and this would be a very good turn of events. So those are my basic thoughts. I think Korea is exactly on the right track, but I would try to make it a regional cooperation. Back over to you, Won-soo.
For your thoughts, and I think today I'm trying my best to touch on your domain, economic and sustainability, and you are, as you said, focusing on our domain, political and geopolitics. And thank you so much for your, I think, very creative ideas in how we can fill up the leadership, global leadership vacuum we have now. And as you said, politics aside, but I'm also deeply worried to see divided America, divided United States, and largely it seems to me we are now seeing two Americas. Because almost every day I start my day watching CNN, but also immediately after CNN, Fox. And the news, same news I'm seeing on two broadcast news channels of the United States, not only different, but almost on every issue, exactly opposite. So I'm seeing two Americas looking at the same thing, but from the opposite angles. So I agree with the observation, whoever wins the next election, which is also critical, not only for America, but also for the whole world, no matter who wins that election, that division, structured, now I think it's a structural division, deep-rooted division. Even I think you describe it as tribal politics. Maybe we are seeing now two different political tribes emerging in the United States. That, I agree with you, that will hamper the ability for the U.S. to lead the world. So what international community should do to fill up that leadership vacuum in the world. And thank you so much for sharing your creative ideas. And I very much like your idea to start a new cooperation in East Asia along the successes we have in our fight against COVID-19, and maybe countries in the Asia Pacific, as most of countries in the region get out of at least the first wave of COVID-19, we can think of having some sort of regional regime on safe travel and also some cooperation on critical aspects of this health crisis, including vaccine and treatment medicines. So maybe we can think of regional cooperation on the response to COVID-19 and how we restore our lives in the day after. And also I like your idea very much. And then first, maybe countries in the Asia Pacific have some sort of cooperation in place among ourselves first, and then we can reach out to Europe along your idea of Eurasian cooperation on Green New Deal. And I think is a coalition of the willing. And I think also is the coalition of the able as well. So if we can form the international coalition in the Eurasian region, countries in the Asia Pacific and countries in Europe form the coalition of the willing and able, capable to pursue the path on a Green New Deal as a new paradigms for the whole humanity to follow. And then maybe even divided America may see that reality that they are then the odd man out, and they may have to follow Eurasian lead in fighting against climate change. So I think those type of new global cooperation regime, I think we need to think, and I like your creativity and also flexibility, because the new normal in international reality will be qualitatively different from the world we have in the post-World War II period for the last 75 years. There we see the emergence of China as second most powerful state. So many observers call this reality as G2. G2 means US and China. But at the same time, many observers, including myself, remain worried about the vacuum of global leadership on crucial areas, including health and sustainability, by both G2. So we are living in a new world, new normal, G0. So no global leadership from the most powerful states, and countries like G7 minus G2 or G20 minus G2, or possibly regional cooperation, as you suggested, in the Asia Pacific. And I think we should be more flexible about how we form the coalition of the willing and able. And it should be the coalition of like-minded states, not only sharing trade, investment, and maybe even movement of people, and maybe safe travel, but also sharing our fundamental values. And I think value-based coalition of like-minded countries will have to be the norm of the day after COVID-19. And I think I welcome your suggestions for exploring a regional cooperative economic partnership in the Asia Pacific, and also seeking Eurasian partnership. We have already a long-standing mechanism we call Asia-Europe meeting, ASEM. We started more than 20 years ago. So we have ongoing partnership mechanism between Asia and Europe. And I think it's time for us to have serious look to that mechanism as well as a Eurasian cooperative initiative. And thank you so much. And also, but of course now I want to go back to your domain, sustainability domain, once again, because when we talk about paradigm shift, I think we have to look very seriously at the urbanization model we have. Because most of the hotspots, as you pointed out, Jeff, are in the largest cities. Crowded areas, weak spots, neglected spots in the largest cities. And there, I think also Asia Pacific has very an important role to play, because 30 years of the past, recent past urbanization has been led by China, and future, next immediate urbanization will be led not only by China, but also India. So if we don't come up with better, more sustainable, human-centered urbanization model for the world, we are in great trouble. And I think there are Asian countries need to work together to come up with a better urbanization model. And here, I think the catchword for future urbanization should be small can be beautiful. Big, crowded is no longer beautiful. So I hope we have to look very seriously again to what should be the future more sustainable, human-centered urbanization model for Asia, but also for the world. So I'd like to also invite your insights on what should be the new paradigm for the future cities in Asia Pacific and for the world. Back to you, Jeff.
You raise big and difficult questions. Asia is going to be crowded. It's got a lot of people, 4 billion people crowded into relatively small areas. So the densities in Asia will be high, but they have to be livable, decent, pleasant places to live, and not dangerous places to live. But there are many sources of danger. The epidemic is one. The air pollution has been a second one that kills millions of people every year. It doesn't have the shock of a new virus, but it is a massive, massive killer. And countries in Asia should know better, starting with China. When you can't see the sunshine day after day after day, when some days it's so dirty that you can't even go out or send your children to school, you know that the economy is not serving you. You're a slave to an economy that is actually killing rather than serving. So the idea of building sustainable, pleasant, healthful, clean places to live, also places that won't have water crisis, because this is going to be another big challenge for many places if we don't get climate change under control, is similarly urgent. Now, I'm optimistic that we can do this using renewable energy, electrification of transport, and smart information technology. Because I think information technology can really change our lives for the better. Not only did it help to contain the epidemic, but now so many people are working from home at least some of the time. And I think that's an improvement because we don't have to all commute every day, long commute, if you can use information technology. So maybe you go to the office 2 times a week and work from home 3 times a week. And if the smart systems actually allow us more leisure time, because, you know, Korean people work very, very long hours, the longest hours in the world of the high income countries. But maybe the new technologies could allow for more leisure, allow the machines to do more, save some of the very long commutes and congestion, and make it easier for us to convert to renewable energy as well. So I really like the combination you emphasized of digital and renewable as a basic theme. I don't think it's going to end city life, but it can make it cleaner. It can reduce the dependence on automobiles. It can raise the ability to work in our own neighborhoods. It can make commerce more efficient with e-commerce. It can make governance more efficient, just as Korea government was able to use the information technology to alert people how to stay safe. I think I'm a believer in telemedicine. I'm a believer in online education. I'm a believer in the seminar that we're having together. We're having a very normal discussion halfway around the world. And this is made possible by all of this wonderful new technology. So I think that this is the right combination. Digital plus clean plus the great slogan of the United Nations that Ban Ki-moon championed and brought to life, leave no one behind. In other words, this should be fair. This should be inclusive. This should be for everybody. And if we make that those three things, that government ensures access for everybody, that the digital economy enables us to have a cleaner and actually more home-based and more productive lives, and if the renewable energy stops the climate disaster, and all of the countries of Asia have renewable energy potential, especially if they join a grid together, then it's really possible to do that. And by the way, Australia, instead of exporting coal, could export sunshine. It could also export hydrogen by using its coal in a clean way by storing the CO2 and then shipping the hydrogen, something that it wants to do with Japan. It would be possible to accomplish an enormous amount. I don't think we could make completely small is beautiful, because 50 million people in Korea and 1.4 billion people in China and 130 million people in Japan and 100 million people in Vietnam and 200 million people in Indonesia. It's a lot of people. And it's going to remain that way, even though it will change gradually over the century. But we could make life much more pleasant, much more healthful, more productive, and more leisure time by choosing the sustainable path. We need to get the region off of coal. We need to get the region off of imported oil, which is a source of instability anyway. Why use Middle East oil when you could use your own wind and sunshine and trade clean energy within Asia? And fortunately, the Middle East has also a solar alternative itself. So all of this is to say, I know technologically there is a path forward which is better, productive, higher quality of life, better health, and more leisure as well, which I think is very, very important, because life should not just be more than 2,000 hours of work per year. It should have time for pleasures and values. And I think that this is the direction that all countries should aspire to. And I believe that it could be shared values across the region. Of course, different countries have different traditions, but the Confucian tradition of Northeast Asia is a great cultural base for cooperation among many countries, including China, Korea, and Japan, and countries in Southeast Asia and so on. There's so much to build on. The technology plus the shared values could really make the kind of world that we want. And I have to salute you and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, because during Secretary General's time as leading the world at the United Nations, he brought forward two of the greatest agreements of our time on the Sustainable Development Goals, the so-called Agenda 2030, and the Paris Climate Agreement. So that gives us a roadmap. And the coronavirus doesn't change that roadmap. It makes it even more important. And so that's your accomplishment and the Secretary General's accomplishment to bring the whole world together on that. Now we have to really show that there remains among almost all of the world, even if my country is so divided, almost all of the world wants to implement these two great agreements. Back over to you.
former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has been doing. But also I have to thank you, because you are the architect of UN's development goals, which started year 2000, Millennium Development Goals, and then its successor, Sustainable Development Goals. And without your intellectual and or even physical contribution, because I had an opportunity to travel with you to many parts of the world, including Africa, where you built about a dozen, maybe more than a dozen millennium villages. So you are the ones not who puts many ideas on the table, but also tries to translate those ideas into reality through real projects for real people in Africa. So my compliments to you, Jeff. And also you have brought about many points, but I like to maybe pick up two further points. First, on the benefits regional cooperation can bring about. I mean, as you said, Australia can export solar and hydraulic energy to other countries in the Asia Pacific, but then we have to cross the Pacific. If we look at Mongolia, which is connected by land to most of the countries in the region, they have more than plenty sunshine. So if we build solar power plants in the Gobi Desert, they can provide, I think, more than enough renewable energies for China, for Korea, even for Japan. And then that will allow us to reduce our dependence on the dirtiest fuel, the coal. So there will be huge benefits coming from regional cooperation, as you suggested. But then the main challenge is how we make politics right. So politics is the challenge we have to overcome. But if we see the common benefit outweighing political challenges, and I think there will be a new path opening for all of us. That's my first comment. Second point, and also I'd like to invite further your comments on this point, is that through international response to COVID-19, I think we are witnessing two fundamental divides we have. The first divide, of course, is rich and poor. And I think response clearly shows that those who have means and those who are able to cope with it, despite social distancing, can enjoy better life because they don't even have to commute to their work. But still, they have means to live their comfortable life. But those who are poor and depend on daily income have to work despite health risk they are having. So those who don't have means are hit more severely, and some of them are not insured, health, and also unemployment. So that's the first divide we are witnessing now. And second divide we are witnessing is those who are digitally capable and those who are not. So digital divide, even tele-education exposes even some households in Korea, they don't have smart devices they can work on. So the problem is that how we help those who are underprivileged and marginalized to bridge this wealth divide and technology divide. So when we think of the solutions to cope with this crisis and also larger sustainability crisis, I think we have to take really good care of deepening inequality aspect. So with that, I think now I'd like to give maybe floor to Jeff once again for your any final thoughts or final comment. Back to you, Jeff.
Thanks very much. I think that the point of the Sustainable Development Goals is the universal possibility of a good life. So the SDGs call for ending poverty and hunger, SDGs 1 and 2, universal access to healthcare, SDG 3, universal access to education, SDG 4, gender equality is SDG 5, universal access to safe water and sanitation, SDG 6, universal access to clean energy, SDG 7, universal access to decent jobs is SDG 8. So that is an agenda of human dignity and human rights, but it's also technologically and economically feasible. But of course, it requires sharing, that the rich don't just get richer, but they are paying taxes, and that government is ensuring that everybody can benefit. And the benefiting these days is both enhanced by the digital technologies, because now we can reach people everywhere. Any child, in principle, could be able to learn or participate in listening in our discussion, or joining an online education program, or receiving health care even through telemedicine from a distance. But you raised the point, and I think it's a very practical and important one. As digital technologies become more and more important, as I believe they will be, and make possible universal access to health or education or public services and so forth, we have to make sure everybody has access actually to these technologies, because as you said, that's not the case. And when I was speaking just a couple of weeks ago with the CEO of Verizon, one of our biggest telecoms companies, and he had been the CEO of Ericsson before that, one of the major telecoms hardware providers, he said, well, we should have an SDG 18, which is universal access to the digital age. And I think that there is a real point to that, we have this very powerful tool. It's proven itself in the epidemic control. It's proving itself in distance education. It's proving itself in distance medicine and in other smart systems and in work from home and other benefits. But now we have to make sure everyone has good access to it. And by the way, it comes ironically back to this problem of the U.S. attack on China on these issues, because where are the big semiconductor companies located now? In Asia, Samsung, or the big semiconductor companies of Taiwan, or many of the advanced companies of China, like the telecoms company Huawei. And Huawei produced the low-cost 5G system, also competing with Korea, with Sweden and others. but it's very good company. But it uses some chips made by U.S. equipment. Now the U.S. is trying to stop the company, kill it. I think that's unfair, but also dangerous, because we will set back the digital economy. We'll create big divisions. Samsung should have the freedom to sell to Huawei and to other customers, but if the United States says, oh, Samsung can't sell its semiconductors to China anymore because you're on one side and China's on the other side, this is not good for the Korean economy either. And this is the narrow-minded thinking of those who want to divide the world into pieces to try to keep control, as opposed to those who want an open world where we apply the solutions more generally. I think Korea does much better in an open world because if Korea's got customers in China and customers in America and customers in Europe, that's a kind of dynamic that is very good. But if the world is divided, no, you can't sell here, but you have to sell here, and we will punish you if you do something else, it's going to create a big, big mess. So just to finish, the idea that we should all benefit from these technologies is crucial. Your point that until this epidemic is stopped everywhere, we're all continuing in danger is absolutely correct. The idea that cooperation can speed the solution is very important for us. And the idea that East Asia and the Pacific, especially Australia and New Zealand, together have made the fastest advances, have leading edge technologies, have the best know-how, and if they cooperate together can help the world to end this crisis very fast is how I would like to end my remarks, except to say to thank you and to thank the Future Consensus Institute very much for the opportunity to be with one of the world's great diplomats and one of my wonderful friends and teachers on these matters, Ambassador Won-soo Kim.
For sharing your thoughts and insights, and you already think of creating one more Sustainable Development Goals, and I think it's a very good idea, because unless we find a way to bridge the digital divide we have now in the post-COVID-19 era, then I think we cannot achieve a world better for all, inclusive for all. And the aim of Sustainable Development Goals is the world a better and more equitable place for everybody, every humanity. So I very much welcome your suggestion to expand even Sustainable Development Goals. And also, I think today's discussion clearly shows that 1 hour is not enough for our discussion, and I want to make clear to everybody who joined us today online, today marks the beginning of our global future dialogue. We are planning with the UN Sustainable Development Solution Network, which Jeff has led so ably under his remarkable leadership on this issue. So we will continue this dialogue, and also I want to take this opportunity to thank Jeff first for finding your precious time to share your insights and creativity with us. And also I want to thank everybody who joined us today online for your interest and attention. So I can say that this will be to be continued. Thank you so much.